Be me Alexa, 24, and I thought compliments were a man's job. If I had to rate myself, I'd say I'm a solid 7/10, maybe an 8 on a really good day with professional makeup and the right lighting. I'm not a supermodel, but I've never had trouble getting attention. It's just been a fact of my life. You walk into a room, you get noticed, you post a story, you get replies. It's the default setting. Because of this, I developed a certain worldview. It wasn't malicious. It was just observational. I saw the world as being divided in a very simple way. There are men and there are women. Women are the ones who receive. We receive compliments, attention, drinks at the bar, doors being held open. We are the ones to be appreciated. Men are the ones who give. They provide, they pursue, they praise. Their role is to put in the effort. It seemed like a natural law, like gravity. My friends and I would talk about it all the time. We'd sit around, scrolling through our phones, sharing screenshots of DMs from guys. Look at this one. He said I have a smile that could end wars. We'd laugh. It was so over the top. This guy told me I was the most intelligent woman he'd ever met after I explained the plot of a movie to him. More laughter. Compliments were like currency, and we were swimming in it. They were so common they became background noise. A guy telling you you're beautiful is the same as a cashier telling you to have a nice day. You barely even register it. On the flip side, I never once thought about complimenting a guy. Why would I? It would be like complimenting a hammer for being good at hitting nails. That's its job. Men were functional. They were supposed to be strong, stoic, capable. Their value was in what they did, not in how they looked or how nice their laugh was. Praising a man for his appearance felt weird, almost like I was doing his job for him. It would upset the natural balance of things. My perception of the average guy was that he was just a dude, a bit rough around the edges, probably thinking about sports or cars, not needing or wanting emotional validation from a woman. They were simple creatures in my mind. They wanted respect for their achievements, sure, but not for something as frivolous as their smile. This entire belief system was my operating software for years. It ran in the background of every interaction I had. Then, a few months ago, I was having coffee with a small group of friends. It was a mixed group, which was rare. Usually it was just my girlfriends, but this time, a male acquaintance was there. He's not a bad guy, just average. Not particularly handsome, not rich, not charismatic. He was just a background character in my life. The conversation somehow drifted to dating, as it always does. One of my friends was complaining about a guy who wasn't putting in enough effort. He hasn't complimented my new haircut in 2 days, she said, and we all nodded in sympathy. A cardinal sin. I chimed in with my usual philosophy. I said something like, it's literally their most basic function, to notice and appreciate. It's the bare minimum. I expected the guy in our group to just nod along or stay quiet. That's what they usually do. But he didn't. He looked at me, not in an angry way, but with a kind of tired curiosity. He asked me, when was the last time you complimented a guy? I just stared at him. The question was so absurd. I don't do that, I said, as if he'd asked when I last tried to build a rocket ship in my backyard. He pressed the issue. He wanted to know why not. So I explained my whole worldview. The giver-receiver dynamic, the hammer and the nail. I told him men don't need it. They get their validation from succeeding at work or winning a game. They're not wired for that kind of stuff. He listened patiently, letting me finish my entire speech. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that really stuck with me. He told me I was completely, fundamentally wrong. He said, the average guy might get 1 or 2 genuine, unprompted compliments from a woman in his entire adult life. Not his mom, not his sister, a woman he isn't related to. I actually laughed out loud. It sounded like the most ridiculous exaggeration I had ever heard. "That's insane," I told him. "You guys are just not paying attention. Or maybe you're only counting compliments from supermodels." "No," he said, his voice very calm. "I'm talking about any compliment. About a shirt. About how he handled a stressful situation. About his sense of humor. Anything." He continued, explaining his theory. "For women, compliments are abundant. Even a girl who doesn't take care of herself, who has a bad attitude, will still collect a lifetime's worth of praise from guys trying to get her attention. For men, it's a desert, an emotional wasteland." He said a guy working a normal job, like in construction or retail, could go years without hearing a single nice word about himself from a woman. He claimed that if a man ever does receive a compliment, he'll remember it forever. He'll store it in a core memory file and replay it in his head on bad days. I told him he was being dramatic. I thought he was just bitter about his own dating life and projecting it onto all men. My friends backed me up. They all agreed he was wrong. So he proposed a wager. He said, "I'll bet you the cost of a dinner at that expensive steakhouse you love that you can't prove your own theory." The challenge was simple. I had to go out and give a simple, genuine compliment to 10 random men. The compliments couldn't be overly flirty, just simple human observations. "That's a nice color on you," or "You have a kind smile." My prediction was that they would either A, barely notice, B, assume I was hitting on them and get weird, or C, just grunt and move on. His prediction was that their reactions would surprise me. I accepted immediately. It was the easiest bet I would ever win. Free steak dinner, here I come. I was so confident. I pictured myself recounting the story to him, laughing about how predictable and emotionally blunt men were. The next day, I started my experiment. It felt silly, almost like I was conducting a nature documentary. I was on my way to the gym, and I passed a small construction site. There was a group of guys on their break, sitting on a low brick wall, eating their lunch. I scanned the group, looking for my first subject. My eyes landed on one of them. He was maybe in his mid-20s, a bit on the chubby side, with a tired look on his face. He was laughing at something one of his friends said. When he laughed, his whole face lit up. It was a genuine, happy smile. Perfect, I thought. My compliment would be, "You have a nice smile." Simple, inoffensive. My internal monologue was running wild. He's a construction worker, a manly man. He's probably going to think I'm crazy or just give me a weird look. I took a deep breath and walked over. I felt a bit awkward, like I was breaking some unspoken social rule, which, according to my own rules, I was. I approached him, making sure to keep a neutral, friendly expression. "Excuse me," I said, and he looked up, surprised. His friends went quiet. "Yeah?" he asked, a bit of suspicion in his voice. "Sorry to bother you. I was just walking by and I noticed you have a really kind smile." The words came out, and I just stood there, waiting for the indifferent reaction I was so sure would come. It did not. First, there was a complete system freeze. He just stared at me. His mouth was slightly open. The sandwich in his hand paused halfway to his mouth. He blinked a few times, as if he was trying to process a language he didn't understand. His friends were looking back and forth between us, equally confused. Then he glanced at his friends, as if to ask, "Is she talking to me?" He looked back at me. "Me?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, you," I confirmed, trying to keep my voice steady. A slow wave of color started to creep up his neck. It spread to his cheeks, then to the tips of his ears. He was blushing, deeply. I had never seen a grown man blush like that before. He ducked his head, looking down at the ground, and a shy, awkward smile appeared on his face. It was completely different from the big, open laugh I had seen moments before. "Oh," he mumbled. "Wow. Thanks." He looked up at me again for just a second, and the gratitude in his eyes was so intense it was almost shocking. "No one's ever said that to me before," he said, still looking mostly at his boots. I just nodded, said, "Have a good day," and walked away as quickly as I could without it being weird. As I walked away, I could hear his friends starting to talk in low voices, probably teasing him, but it wasn't the kind of mocking teasing I expected. My heart was beating way too fast. My first thought was, what a fluke. That guy must be unusually sensitive or something, an outlier. But I couldn't shake the image of his reaction. The total system shut down, the confusion, the blush, the genuine, unvarnished pleasure. It wasn't the reaction of someone who heard things like that all the time. It was the reaction of someone who had just found an oasis in the middle of a desert. I was a little rattled, but still convinced it was a one-off. One weird reaction doesn't prove a theory. My next target came a day or two later. I was in a coffee shop, one of those busy downtown places where everyone is stressed and in a hurry. The line was long, and there was only one guy behind the counter, working the espresso machine and taking orders. He was doing an incredible job. He was fast, efficient, and he still managed to be polite to every single customer, even the rude ones. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but he was keeping it together. When it was my turn, I ordered my usual. As he was handing me my drink, I decided he would be subject number 2. "Hey," I said, making sure to make eye contact. "I just want you to know you're doing an amazing job. It's crazy busy in here, and you're handling it like a pro." This time, the reaction was different, but just as powerful. He stopped what he was doing. The corporate customer service smile dropped from his face. It was replaced by a look of genuine surprise. His posture changed. He stood up a little straighter. A real smile broke through his exhaustion. It reached his eyes. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was full of so much relief. "That really means a lot. It's been a rough morning." For the rest of the time I was in the coffee shop, working on my laptop, I noticed a change in him. He seemed to have a new spring in his step. He was still busy, but he wasn't just a robot anymore. He was smiling more, joking with customers. My compliments seemed to have refilled some kind of energy tank I didn't even know existed. I sat there, sipping my coffee, feeling deeply, profoundly confused. 2 for 2. 2 completely different men in completely different situations, with 2 intensely positive reactions to a simple, throwaway compliment. This wasn't going according to plan. I was supposed to be gathering evidence for my inevitable victory and free steak dinner. Instead, I was gathering evidence that was systematically dismantling a core pillar of my belief system. It was unsettling. The experiment continued over the next week or so. It became a strange little side quest in my daily life. Subject number 3 was a guy at the grocery store. He was young, probably a student working part-time, stocking shelves in the soda aisle. He was so focused, arranging the bottles with this incredible precision, making sure all the labels faced forward perfectly. It was weirdly satisfying to watch. I waited for him to finish a row. "That's some impressive attention to detail," I said. "It looks great." Same pattern. The pause, the look of disbelief, the quick check to see if I was talking to someone behind him. Then, the small, pleased smile. "Oh, thanks. I just like to do it right," he said, and he seemed to stand a little taller as he went back to his work. It was like I was wielding some kind of superpower I never knew I had, a superpower that consisted of just being a decent human being. The 4th was a guy at a bookstore. He helped me find a book in a really obscure section. He didn't just point, he walked me right to it. I thanked him and then added, "You're seriously good at your job. Thank you for being so helpful." He beamed, a full-on 1,000-watt smile. He told me I'd made his day. His day. I had made his day by stating a simple, observable fact. It was starting to feel less like an experiment to win a bet and more like a series of revelations that were making me question everything. My mental image of men as these stoic, unfeeling monoliths was cracking at the seams. They weren't monoliths. They were just people. People who were walking through a world that apparently never gave them a single word of affirmation. The contrast with my own life was stark. I thought about all the compliments I'd received that week. From the guy at the gym about my form. From a coworker about a presentation. From a stranger on the street who liked my jacket. I had taken them all for granted. They were just part of the daily static. But for these men, a single one of those comments was a landmark event. It was around this time that the arrogance I had felt at the beginning of the bet started to curdle into something else. It was a mix of shame and a strange kind of sadness. I had been walking through the world, seeing half the population as NPCs, as service providers, as beings whose inner lives were of no consequence to me. I had judged them for not providing a service, compliments, that I had never, not once, considered offering myself. The hypocrisy was staggering, and I was only just beginning to see the scale of it. But the bet wasn't over. I still had 6 more men to go. I decided to see it through to the end. I had to know how deep this went. I was no longer trying to win. I was just trying to understand. The 5th encounter happened a couple of days later. I was in the park, just reading a book on a bench. A guy walked by with a golden retriever. The dog was incredibly well behaved, walking right by his side without a leash, looking up at him every few seconds. It was clear they had a great bond. When they passed in front of my bench, I couldn't help but smile. "Your dog is amazing," I said. He stopped and grinned, clearly proud. "Thanks, he's my best friend." Then I looked at him and added my real compliment. "It's obvious you're a great owner. He looks so happy and well cared for." The guy's reaction was subtle but profound. The pride in his expression softened into something warmer, more personal. "Wow," he said, scratching the dog behind the ears. "Thank you. I try my best for him." He wasn't blushing or flustered. He was just seen. It was a compliment, not about his looks or his shirt, but about his character, his dedication to another living being. We chatted for another minute about dogs, and when he walked away, he had this relaxed, happy confidence about him. I was 5 for 5. The pattern was undeniable. There were no outliers. This was the norm. My worldview wasn't just cracking anymore. It was actively crumbling into dust. The next one was almost by accident. I had ordered some food for delivery. I was in a rush, working on a deadline, and I was starving. The app said it would be 45 minutes. The courier showed up in 20. He was a young guy, looked like a student, a bit out of breath from running up the stairs to my apartment. I was so grateful. As I took the food, I said, "Man, you are a lifesaver. That was incredibly fast. Thank you." He looked up from his phone, startled. Most people probably just grab the bag and shut the door. He blinked. "Oh, you're welcome. Just trying to be quick." "Well, you're crushing it," I said with a smile. His tired, professional demeanor just melted away. A huge, genuine smile spread across his face. "Thanks," he said, and it sounded like I'd just given him a massive tip. "Have a great night." He practically skipped down the hallway. I closed the door and leaned against it. 6 for 6. I was starting to feel this weird sense of responsibility, like I'd been given a secret key to a locked room, and I was finally seeing what was inside. And what was inside was this vast, cavernous emptiness. A space that was supposed to be filled with affirmation and was just empty. The 7th encounter was the one that broke me. It was a Thursday night, I think. I was out with a couple of friends at a quiet bar, the kind of place with dark wood and low music. We were just chatting, having a drink. I noticed a guy sitting by himself at the bar. He wasn't trying to talk to anyone. wasn't staring at women. He was just nursing a beer and looking at something on his phone. He seemed completely content to be in his own world. At one point, he watched a video on his phone, and he let out this quiet, genuine laugh. It wasn't loud or obnoxious, just a really warm, happy sound. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to say something. My friends were in the middle of a conversation that didn't involve me, so I had a moment. I got up, walked over to the bar as if I was going to order another drink, and paused next to him. He glanced up. "Sorry to interrupt," I said quietly. "I was sitting over there and I heard you laugh. You have a really great laugh." I was prepared for the usual pattern: the surprise, the confusion, the blush, the thank you. I was not prepared for what actually happened. He looked at me with absolutely no expression on his face for about 5 long seconds. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't suspicious. He was just processing. Then he set his phone down on the bar, face down. He turned his body slightly to face me. "Can I be honest with you?" he asked, and his voice was completely serious. "Sure," I said, my stomach twisting a little. I had no idea where this was going. He looked me straight in the eye. "The last person to say something like that to me," he said, his voice even and measured, "was my mother. And that was probably when I was a teenager." He wasn't saying it to be sad. He wasn't looking for pity. He was just stating a fact, a piece of data from his life, a piece of data that confirmed everything my acquaintance had told me, but in the most brutal, direct way possible. He held my gaze for another moment. "So, thank you," he said, and a very small, very real smile finally appeared. That was nice to hear. He then turned back to his drink, picked up his phone, and that was it. The interaction was over. I just stood there, frozen. It felt like someone had just reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. A decade or more had passed without anyone, not a friend, not a girlfriend, no one, ever making a simple, kind observation about him. I walked back to my table in a daze. My friends didn't even notice. I couldn't hear their conversation anymore. All I could hear was his voice in my head. The bet was over. I had lost so completely, so utterly, that it wasn't even funny. I did the last 3 compliments over the next few days, but my heart wasn't in it in the same way. It wasn't an experiment now. It felt like a duty. An older gentleman in a really sharp suit. "You look incredibly dapper today." He stood up straighter and gave me a courtly nod. "Why, thank you, young lady." A young guy who worked at the movie theater, who was patiently explaining ticket prices to an angry customer. "You handled that with a lot of class." He looked shocked, then relieved. "Thanks. I try." A man who was helping his elderly father out of a car. It's a beautiful thing to see how you care for your dad. He looked at me with watery eyes and just nodded, unable to speak. 10 for 10. A perfect, unbroken streak of men who were starving for a single drop of positive affirmation. That night, I went home and I sat on my couch in the dark. I thought about my life. I thought about the endless stream of validation I had received since I was a teenager. "You're so pretty. You're so smart. You're so funny." It was a constant flow, so constant that I had built dams to block it out, to treat it as meaningless spam. I had become so overfed that I couldn't even taste the food anymore. And all that time, an entire half of the population was living in a famine. They were expected to be the farmers, to till the soil, to grow the crops, to harvest them, and to serve them to us on a silver platter. But no one ever thought to save a plate for them. I finally understood. The manly stoicism I had always seen wasn't a natural state. It was a coping mechanism. It was a suit of armor they had to build for themselves because they were constantly walking through a battlefield of indifference. They weren't simple. They weren't emotionally blunt. They were just unsupported. My whole men are like hammers theory was the most ignorant, arrogant thing I had ever believed. A hammer doesn't get lonely. A hammer doesn't have bad days. A hammer doesn't wonder if it's good enough. I pulled out my phone and found my conversation with my acquaintance. I typed out a short message. "You were right. You win the bet. Let me know when you want to go for that steak dinner. My treat." A reply came back almost instantly. "I know." That was all he said. No, I told you so. No gloating. He didn't need to. We both understood. I don't know if this story has a grand moral. It's just what happened. But it changed me. I don't see men the same way anymore. When I walk down the street now, I don't see a landscape of potential suitors or providers or background NPCs. I see individuals. I see the tired-looking guy on the bus, the cheerful cashier at the hardware store, the young father struggling with a stroller, and I see the armor they're all wearing. I now realize that a compliment from a woman to a man isn't just a compliment. It's a signal. It's a message that says, "I see you. Not your function, not your wallet, not what you can do for me. I see you, the human being." And a message like that, in a world that is silent, is worth more than I could have ever imagined. I lost the bet, but I think I gained something much more valuable.